The galaxy was vast, but it wasn't infinite. For centuries, countless species had shared its resources, living in a delicate balance of cooperation and respect. But then, humanity arrived, bursting onto the interstellar stage with all the subtlety of a supernova. In just 200 years since their first contact with alien civilizations, humans had spread like wildfire, colonizing planets, mining asteroids, and consuming resources at an alarming rate. Their rapid expansion didn't sit well with other species, many of whom saw humanity as reckless and dangerous. The Galactic Tribunal, a council of ancient beings representing thousands of worlds, watched humanity's rise with growing unease. These judges were not cruel or unreasonable. They had governed the galaxy for millennia, ensuring peace and stability among its diverse inhabitants. But humanity's unchecked ambition was testing the limits of their patience. The tribunal held meetings in secret, debating what to do about this unpredictable new species. Some argued for leniency, pointing out that humanity was still young and learning. Others demanded swift punishment, fearing that if left unchecked, humans would destroy the fragile harmony of the galaxy. On Earth, no one knew about these discussions until it was too late. One morning, news broke across every screen and device on the planet. Humanity had been summoned before the Galactic Tribunal. The message came without warning, delivered by a fleet of alien ships hovering silently above major cities. People stared up at the massive vessels, their sleek metallic surfaces glinting in the sunlight. Panic spread quickly. What did the tribunal want? Was this the end of human independence? Governments scrambled to respond, holding emergency meetings and consulting experts. Military leaders prepared for the worst, though they knew Earth's weapons were no match for the advanced technology of the tribunal. Amidst the chaos, one name rose to the forefront: Daniel Carter. A diplomat known for his sharp mind and calm demeanor, Daniel had spent years negotiating treaties with alien species. He wasn't flashy or famous, but he had a reputation for getting results when the stakes were high. It was decided that he would represent humanity at the trial. Joining him was Dr. Laura Bennett, a brilliant astrophysicist who specialized in interstellar diplomacy. Laura was younger than Daniel, with a quiet confidence that masked her nerves. She had worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between humanity and other species, often serving as a translator during tense negotiations. Together, Daniel and Laura made a formidable team. They were given less than a week to prepare before leaving for Arendor, the tribunal's orbital headquarters. The spacecraft assigned to transport them was unlike anything either of them had seen before. Sleek and silver, it hummed with energy as they boarded. Inside, the walls shimmered faintly, and the air smelled faintly of ozone. Neither Daniel nor Laura spoke much during the journey. Both were lost in thought, trying to anticipate what awaited them. Would the tribunal listen to reason, or had humanity already sealed its fate? When they arrived at Arendor, the scale of the station took their breath away. It was enormous, larger than any human-made structure they had ever seen. Floating in the void of space, it resembled a giant ring studded with glowing lights. As their ship docked, they were greeted by a delegation of aliens. These beings were tall and imposing, their forms hidden beneath flowing robes that seemed to shimmer with starlight. Their faces were obscured by masks, giving them an air of mystery and authority. Daniel and Laura followed the delegation through long corridors filled with strange symbols etched into the walls. The air was cool and carried a faint metallic tang. Eventually, they reached the main chamber where the tribunal convened. The room was circular with high ceilings and rows of seats arranged in tiers. At the center stood a raised platform where the tribunal members sat, their robes glowing softly in the dim light. As Daniel and Laura took their places, they couldn't help but feel small and insignificant. The tribunal members loomed over them, their voices deep and resonant as they began the proceedings. One member, a being called Xyloth, stepped forward to address the court. His voice echoed like rolling thunder as he listed humanity's crimes: illegal annexation of inhabited worlds, destruction of ecosystems, disregard for interstellar treaties. Each accusation hit like a hammer blow, painting humanity as a reckless and destructive force. Daniel clenched his fists, but forced himself to remain calm. This was only the beginning. He glanced at Laura, who nodded slightly, offering silent support. They had expected these charges, but hearing them spoken aloud in such a formal setting was sobering. When Xyloth finished speaking, the chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to Daniel, waiting for his response. Taking a deep breath, Daniel stepped forward. His heart pounded, but his voice remained steady. "We are not perfect," he began. "Humanity has made mistakes, and we acknowledge that. But we are also a species capable of growth and change." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Our history is filled with struggles, yes, but also with moments of triumph. We have learned from our past, and we are committed to building a better future." Laura joined him, holding up a datapad. "We have evidence of humanity's efforts to repair damaged environments and establish peaceful relations with neighboring species," she said. Holographic projections appeared in the air, showing images of Earth's reforestation projects, sustainable colonies, and joint ventures with alien partners. The tribunal members watched impassively, their expressions unreadable. Despite their arguments, the atmosphere in the chamber remained tense. Daniel could sense that the tribunal was not convinced. Their task was far from over. As the session ended, he realized they needed more than words to win this fight. They needed proof, not just of humanity's potential, but of the tribunal's own role in fueling conflict. And time was running out. After the first session of the trial, Daniel and Laura retreated to their quarters aboard Arendor. The room was small but functional, with smooth metal walls and a faint hum of machinery in the background. They sat across from each other at a simple table, the weight of the day pressing down on them. Daniel leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. His mind raced as he replayed every moment of the tribunal's accusations. Laura, meanwhile, stared at the datapad in front of her, scrolling through files and notes they had prepared for the trial. "It's not enough," Laura said, finally breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge of frustration in it. "They're not listening. All our evidence about Earth's progress, it doesn't matter to them." Daniel nodded slowly. "They've already made up their minds," he agreed. "We need something stronger, something that forces them to see us differently." Laura tilted her head, thinking, "What if we focus on their hypocrisy? If we can show that they've manipulated events to make humanity look worse than it is?" Her words trailed off, but Daniel understood what she meant. He frowned, considering the idea. It wasn't far-fetched. The tribunal had immense power, and history showed that powerful entities often used underhanded tactics to maintain control. But how could they prove such a thing? The tribunal wouldn't just hand over evidence of its own wrongdoing. "We'd need proof," Daniel said. "Something undeniable. Records, communications, anything that shows they've been pulling strings behind the scenes." Laura nodded. "It's risky, but it might be our only chance. If we can access restricted areas of Arendor, maybe we can find something useful." The thought of sneaking around the tribunal's headquarters sent a chill down Daniel's spine. Getting caught would mean immediate expulsion or worse, but he knew Laura was right. They couldn't rely on logic or goodwill alone. They needed leverage. The next morning, Daniel and Laura attended another hearing. This time, the atmosphere was even more hostile. Xyloth, the tribunal member who had accused humanity during the first session, spoke again. His voice boomed through the chamber, listing examples of human aggression and environmental destruction. Each accusation was accompanied by holographic images: barren planets stripped of resources, alien refugees displaced by human expansion, violent clashes between human settlers and native species. Daniel watched carefully, searching for inconsistencies in Xyloth's arguments. At one point, Xyloth mentioned a conflict on a distant moon where humans had allegedly attacked peaceful colonists. Daniel remembered reading about that incident. Official reports claimed the colonists had initiated hostilities, citing territorial disputes. Yet Xyloth portrayed humanity as the aggressor without acknowledging any context. Laura noticed Daniel's expression change and leaned closer to whisper, "He's cherry-picking details. Some of these incidents don't add up. Daniel nodded slightly, keeping his eyes on Xyloth. When the tribunal member finished speaking, Daniel stood to respond. He began by addressing the specific examples Xyloth had raised, providing alternative perspectives supported by neutral observers. For instance, he cited testimony from non-human mediators who had investigated the moon conflict and concluded that both sides shared blame. But no matter how logical his arguments were, the tribunal members remained unmoved. Their expressions betrayed nothing, not agreement, not disagreement, not even curiosity. It was as if they had already decided humanity's fate and were simply going through the motions. As the session ended, Daniel felt a growing sense of urgency. They weren't making progress. Every word they spoke seemed to bounce off an invisible wall. If they wanted to turn the tide, they needed to act quickly and boldly. That night, Daniel and Laura worked late into the evening, piecing together clues about the tribunal's true motives. They reviewed recordings of the hearings, analyzing every word and gesture from the council members. Laura focused on technical details, searching for patterns in the accusations against humanity. Daniel, on the other hand, relied on instinct, looking for moments when the tribunal seemed to overplay their hand. It was Laura who first noticed something unusual. She replayed a segment where Xyloth described a conflict on a distant planet, named Kralos. According to him, humans had invaded the planet, forcing its native inhabitants to flee. But as Laura cross-referenced the timeline with Earth's records, she realized something didn't add up. The human colony on Krylos had been established years after the alleged invasion occurred. "Daniel," she said, her voice sharp with excitement. "This doesn't make sense. The dates don't match. Humans weren't even there when this supposed attack happened." Daniel leaned over her shoulder, studying the data. "You're right," he said slowly. "If humans weren't involved, then who caused the conflict? And why is Xyloth blaming us?" Laura's fingers flew across the datapad as she dug deeper. She accessed classified files stored in Earth's diplomatic archives, documents detailing interactions between humanity and alien factions over the past century. What she found shocked them both. Several key conflicts involving humans had been covertly instigated by shadowy groups linked to the tribunal itself. These incidents weren't random, Laura explained, her voice trembling with disbelief. They were orchestrated. The tribunal funded rogue factions among humanity's enemies, provoking attacks to make us look aggressive. It's all here. Financial transfers, intercepted communications, everything. Daniel stared at the evidence, his mind racing. This was worse than they had imagined. The tribunal wasn't just judging humanity. It was actively working to undermine them. If they could expose this conspiracy, it might shift the balance in their favor. But accessing restricted areas of Arendor to gather solid proof would be dangerous. Even thinking about it made Daniel uneasy. "We need to act fast," Laura said firmly. "If we can get into the tribunal's archives, we can find more evidence. Something undeniable." Daniel hesitated. Breaking into the archives meant risking everything. If they were caught, the tribunal would dismiss their claims outright, labeling them as criminals. But staying silent meant losing the trial, and possibly Earth's freedom. After a long pause, he nodded. "All right," he said. "Let's do it." The next day, while the tribunal held another session, Daniel and Laura slipped away from the main chamber. Using a map of Arendor Laura had downloaded from the ship's database, they navigated through dimly lit corridors, avoiding patrols of robotic sentinels programmed to detect intruders. The air grew colder as they moved deeper into the station, the walls lined with glowing symbols that pulsed faintly in the darkness. Finally, they reached the entrance to the archives. A heavy door blocked their path, flanked by 2 security drones. Laura knelt beside the control panel, her hands steady despite the tension. She connected her datapad to the system, bypassing layers of encryption with practiced skill. Sweat beaded on her forehead as alarms blared silently within the code, but she managed to disable them one by one. "You're amazing," Daniel whispered, keeping watch behind her. "Don't distract me," Laura muttered, focused intently on her work. After several tense minutes, the door slid open with a soft hiss. They stepped inside quickly, closing it behind them. The archives were vast, filled with rows of holographic displays and storage units containing centuries of galactic history. Laura scanned the room, searching for the section labeled Internal Affairs. That was where the incriminating evidence would be stored, if it existed at all. Over there, Daniel said, pointing to a cluster of terminals glowing faintly in the corner. They hurried over, and Laura began searching the database. Her fingers moved rapidly across the screen, pulling up files marked with high-security tags. Each document revealed more pieces of the puzzle, secret agreements, forged treaties, and detailed plans to destabilize human colonies. "This is it?" Laura breathed, her eyes wide with awe. "We have them," but their victory was short-lived. A low hum filled the room as the security drones activated, alerted by an unknown trigger. Daniel grabbed Laura's arm. "We need to go. Now." They ran toward the exit, clutching the data. Pad loaded with evidence. Behind them, the drones advanced, their mechanical limbs whirring ominously. Laura ducked behind a console, disabling another set of alarms to slow the machines down. Daniel used his body to shield her as they reached the door, which opened just wide enough for them to slip through. Once outside, they sprinted back toward their quarters, hearts pounding. The weight of what they carried, the truth about the tribunal schemes was almost unbearable, but they knew it was only the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, presenting their findings in a way that couldn't be ignored. Back in their room, Daniel and Laura reviewed the stolen files. The evidence was damning. Not only had the tribunal manipulated events to paint humanity as a threat, but they had also exploited divisions among other species to maintain their dominance. Entire wars had been engineered to weaken rival factions, ensuring the tribunal's continued rule. "This changes everything," Daniel said, his voice tinged with both anger and determination. "If we present this during the next hearing, we can turn the tables." Laura nodded, though her expression was grim. "It's risky. They'll fight back hard once they realize what we know." "I know," Daniel replied. "But we don't have a choice. Humanity's future depends on this." As they prepared for the next session, Daniel felt a flicker of hope. For the first time since arriving on Arendor, he believed they had a chance, not just to defend humanity, but to expose the corruption threatening the entire galaxy. Whatever happened next, they were ready. The next hearing began with the same cold formality as the previous sessions. The tribunal members sat on their raised platform, their glowing robes casting an eerie light over the chamber. Below them, Daniel and Laura stood side by side, their faces calm but their hearts racing. They had spent the night preparing for this moment, knowing it would be their last chance to change the course of humanity's fate. As Xyloth rose to speak, his voice echoed through the room, heavy with authority. He listed more accusations against humanity, each one designed to paint Earth as a reckless and dangerous force in the galaxy. The audience, composed of representatives from neutral species, listened intently, their expressions unreadable. Some scribbled notes, while others exchanged quiet whispers. When Xyloth finished, the chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to Daniel, waiting for his response. He took a deep breath, stepping forward with deliberate confidence. "Your Honors," he began, his voice steady, "we have listened carefully to your claims. But before we address them, we must present evidence that challenges the very foundation of this trial." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Even the tribunal members shifted slightly, their masks betraying faint curiosity. Daniel gestured to Laura, who activated the holographic projector attached to her datapad. Images and documents filled the air, glowing brightly against the dim backdrop of the room. "These files were retrieved from your own archives," Daniel continued. "They reveal a pattern of manipulation orchestrated by certain factions within the tribunal. Conflicts involving humanity were not random acts of aggression. They were deliberately provoked to justify intervention." Laura stepped forward, taking over the presentation. She displayed intercepted communications showing financial transfers from the tribunal to rogue alien groups. Next came surveillance footage of secret meetings, where plans to destabilize human colonies were discussed. Finally, she showed maps highlighting regions where these manipulations had occurred, directly contradicting the tribunal's earlier claims. The room erupted into chaos. Delegates from neutral species gasped, some rising from their seats to get a closer look at the evidence. Tribunal members exchanged uneasy glances, their composure cracking for the first time. Xyloth's voice boomed above the commotion, demanding order. "This is outrageous," he declared. "These so-called documents are fabrications, lies created to slander the tribunal." Daniel held up a hand, silencing the crowd. "If these are lies, then why do they match your own records?" he asked calmly. "Why does the timeline align perfectly with events you described during this trial? And why were these files stored in your most secure archives?" Xyloth hesitated, his mask hiding whatever emotion flickered beneath. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of the evidence hung in the air, undeniable and overwhelming. Even some tribunal members seemed shaken, their usual confidence slipping away. One of the judges, a tall figure draped in shimmering blue robes, leaned forward. Her voice was softer than the others, almost hesitant. "If what you say is true, then this is a grave matter. Such actions would violate the principles we stand for." "It is true," Laura interjected, "and it's not just about humanity. Your manipulations have affected countless worlds, creating divisions and distrust across the galaxy. You've used fear to maintain control, sacrificing peace for power." The accusation struck a nerve. Murmurs spread among the audience, growing louder with each passing second. Representatives from neutral species began voicing their support for Daniel and Laura, condemning the tribunal's deceitful tactics. Some even called for an independent investigation into the council's activities. Xyloth tried to regain control, raising his voice to drown out the dissent. "This is irrelevant," he shouted. "Humanity's crimes are well documented. Their expansion threatens the stability of the galaxy." But his words carried little weight now. The tide had turned. Even members of the tribunal seemed reluctant to defend him, their earlier unity fractured by the revelations. One judge, a being cloaked in golden armor, addressed the chamber. "We cannot ignore these allegations," he said firmly. "An inquiry must be conducted to determine the truth." Daniel seized the opportunity. "We agree," he said. "But let us be clear. Humanity is not perfect. We have made mistakes, and we are working to correct them. What sets us apart is our willingness to learn, to grow, and to face the consequences of our actions. Can the same be said for the tribunal?" His question hung in the air, unanswered. The chamber buzzed with conversation as delegates debated the implications of the evidence. Neutral species openly criticized the tribunal, calling for reforms and greater transparency. It was a stunning reversal, one that Daniel and Laura had hoped for but never truly expected. Later that evening, Daniel and Laura returned to their quarters, exhausted but triumphant. The hearings had been suspended pending further investigation, and the tribunal's authority was hanging by a thread. They sat together in silence, reflecting on everything that had happened. "You did it," Laura said finally, breaking the quiet. "You turned the tables." Daniel shook his head. "We did it. Together." Laura smiled faintly, though her expression remained serious. "It's not over yet. The tribunal won't give up without a fight. But for now, we've given humanity a fighting chance." Daniel nodded, staring out the window at the endless expanse of stars. He thought about Earth, its flaws, its potential, and its resilience. Humanity wasn't perfect, but it was learning. That, he realized, was something worth fighting for. As they prepared for the next phase of the trial, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. The galaxy was watching, and for the first time, humanity was being seen not as a threat, but as a species, capable of change. Whatever happened next, they were ready to face it, together. The aftermath of the trial sent shockwaves through the galaxy. News of the tribunal's manipulations spread quickly, carried by delegates from neutral species who had witnessed the proceedings firsthand. On planets far and wide, discussions erupted about the role of the tribunal and whether it still served the interests of the galaxy. Calls for reform grew louder, echoing across star systems and reaching even the most remote corners of space. Back on Earth, the reaction was overwhelming. People poured into the streets celebrating Daniel and Laura as heroes. Their names were everywhere, on news broadcasts, in social media posts, and on banners hung in city squares. For the first time in years, humanity felt a sense of pride and unity. They weren't just survivors, they were fighters determined to prove their worth to the galaxy. But for Daniel and Laura, there was little time to rest. The tribunal had not dissolved completely, though its power was severely weakened. An emergency summit was called, bringing together representatives from every corner of the galaxy to discuss the future of interstellar governance. Daniel and Laura were invited to attend, their roles shifting from defendants to key players in shaping a new era of cooperation. The summit took place on Arendor, the same station where the trial had unfolded. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. Gone was the cold formality of the tribunal's chambers. Instead, open forums replaced closed sessions, with delegates encouraged to speak freely and share ideas. Species that had once been divided by fear and mistrust began to find common ground, united by a shared desire for change. Daniel stood before the assembly on the first day, his voice carrying a quiet strength. "We are here today because we have learned a hard truth," he said. "No one is above accountability, not humanity, and certainly not the tribunal. But this is not a moment for punishment or blame. It is a moment for growth." Laura joined him, adding her perspective. "For too long, fear has driven decisions in this galaxy. Fear of conflict, fear of change, and fear of each other. But fear does not build bridges, trust does." Their words resonated deeply with the audience. Delegates nodded in agreement, some rising to applaud. Slowly but surely, a plan began to take shape. The tribunal would be restructured, its members chosen, through a transparent process involving all species. New laws were drafted to ensure fairness and prevent the kind of manipulation that had nearly destroyed humanity's reputation. As the summit progressed, Daniel and Laura found themselves working closely with leaders from other worlds. These collaborations revealed something unexpected. Humanity's ability to adapt and innovate made them valuable allies. Projects aimed at repairing damaged ecosystems, fostering trade, and promoting cultural exchange gained momentum, with humans playing key roles in their success. By the time the summit concluded, the galaxy looked very different. The tribunal's oppressive influence had been replaced by a spirit of cooperation and mutual respect. Humanity was no longer seen as a reckless upstart, but as a partner willing to contribute to the greater good. Earth's colonies flourished. Under new agreements, and tensions with neighboring species eased significantly. When Daniel and Laura finally returned to Earth, they were greeted as heroes. Crowds lined the streets, cheering and waving flags. Yet neither of them sought the spotlight. Daniel preferred quiet reflection, spending hours alone in his small apartment, thinking about everything that had happened. He knew the road ahead would not always be easy, but he also believed humanity was ready to rise to the challenge. Laura, meanwhile, threw herself into her work. She traveled extensively, meeting with alien scientists and diplomats to strengthen ties between Earth and other worlds. Her efforts paid off, leading to groundbreaking discoveries and partnerships that benefited both humanity and the galaxy at large. Despite their different approaches, Daniel and Laura remained close friends. They often met to discuss the progress being made, sharing stories of hope and resilience. Both understood that the fight for humanity's place in the galaxy was far from over, but they also knew they had laid a strong foundation. Years passed, and the changes continued to unfold. Earth became a hub of innovation and diplomacy, respected and admired by species across the galaxy. Humans no longer viewed themselves as outsiders. Instead, they embraced their role as active participants in a vast and interconnected universe. 1. Evening. Daniel stood on a hill overlooking the city where he had grown up. The sky was filled with stars, each one a reminder of the challenges humanity had faced and overcome. He thought about the trial, the risks they had taken, and the sacrifices made along the way. Most of all, he thought about the future. "We've Come so far, Laura said, joining him. She smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the light of distant suns. But there's still so much more to do. Daniel nodded. Yes, there is, but I think we're ready. They stood in silence for a while, watching the stars twinkle like tiny fires in the darkness. Somewhere out there, whispers of change rippled outward, carried by winds of justice and unity. Humanity had proven itself capable of both error and redemption, and the galaxy was better for it. As Daniel turned to leave, he felt a sense of peace. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had been worth it. Together, they had shown the galaxy that Earth was not just a planet. It was a promise of growth, of learning, and of hope. And that promise would guide them forward into a brighter future for all.